Okay, so this case file is case file 2089, which I like to nickname Slave to Death. Now, for those of you that don't have a clue what I'm talking about when it comes to case files, basically, we at THOF are now uploading client summaries of case files that we've worked on in the past. Nothing that's currently going on, but things that we've worked on in the past that we are making anonymous. So obviously, because we run a witchcraft shop and we mentor people in the study and practice of witchcraft and magic, we get a lot of people with a lot of quite serious problems. We also get asked to investigate various strange paranormal type things. And we thought that it might be an interesting idea for other people's benefit, mainly the people that we mentor on the Patreon page, that we should make a little archive of different cases so that they can look at the diagnosis, how we've diagnosed a problem and how we fixed it, and then kind of, the whole process basically. Now these are summaries and they are going to be made anonymous, so if you're looking for gossip in terms of who's done what, we won't be mentioning any names or specific places that you can kind of work out who the people that are involved are. So don't worry about that if you are a former client. We have been talking to various different people about this, and it's a thing that everyone seems to want. Now, I will be putting this particular case on YouTube just to give you a rough idea of what this is that we're doing with this archive. Now, obviously, for those that are interested, then have a little look in the link below. You're looking for the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon. Now, the Patreon, of course, is designed for us to help mentor you, so it gives you access to us and being able to talk to us. But there are archives and things on there, one of which is these case files. So before I, go too far into that and talking about the Patreon and all that rubbish, let me talk about this particular case. So this is a case that I personally worked on. A ceremonial magician approached me. Basically what happened was, like many people, he had a kind of romanticized view of abroad. So very often people think that greater mysteries and advanced magical practice is dead in Europe and in the Western world, so they kind of look to the East in order to go across, normally on a gap year, let's be fair, and try and learn the secrets from these various yogis and gurus and that kind of thing. Now, this guy decided to take a trip to try and find as many authentic voodoo practitioners as possible. He eventually ends up in New Orleans and thinks that he's found a group of authentic voodoo practitioners that are willing to initiate him into their house for a certain amount of money, of course. Now, the problem with this is that I don't even know where to begin with the problem with this, but essentially, to cut a very, very long story short, what he thought was an initiation ritual, because it was in a different language and he didn't understand the language that the practitioners were talking, what it actually was a contract being drawn up and signed. And he himself was the offering to the spirit, which was a spirit of death, Santa Muerte, in order for her to fulfill her end of the contract. So essentially, to sum up what's happened, he goes in search of magical practitioners to be initiated into voodoo. These practitioners say, yeah, okay, we'll initiate you into our house for X amount of money. He agrees. He turns up to this ritual. They're all saying a load of stuff in a different language, and he's then reciting things in a language that he doesn't speak. And what actually is happening is he's agreeing to be the sacrifice and the offering to a spirit, Santa Muerte, in exchange for her to do some work for the magical practitioners. Now, this is not a very good idea, and I've spoken many, many times, not only about trying to seek out other magical practitioners, because guess what? Just because you have a genuine interest in magic does not mean that practitioners out there want to teach you and that will be willing to teach you. There are many who will, but there are also just as many, if not possibly more, probably more, let's be fair, that will take advantage of you. So be very, very careful when you're doing things like that. Now, essentially what happened was, given that he was an offering to Death, Death decided to eat him. So what was happening was, not only was his life force waning and he was getting weaker and actually dying, he had quite a lot of physical problems, health problems, that kind of thing, but also everything in his life was dying. His love life was dying, his money was draining, everything, every aspect of his life was essentially shriveling up and dying. Now, he thought that obviously there's something weird going on here, so he decides to, again, in his travels, he eventually finds a group of witches in Mexico. He explains what had happened, and they explain to him that they can see that the spirit, the death spirit, is feeding on him. So they offer, in exchange for a certain amount of money, of course, to do a quite hardcore, it was hardcore by the themes of it, cleansing ritual and banishing ritual. It involved him getting his clothes and various other things cut off and burnt, and, you know, ritual washes, baptisms, that kind of thing. Did it have an effect? No, not really. You're dealing with an extremely powerful deity or thing, essentially energy current, Death. Now, Death is the personification of end, the end. It's quite a Saturnine energy. Now, when it comes to cleansing, banishing rituals, generally what you're doing is you're ending something. So when you're evoking the power and causing an end to something, then that is very much the domain of Death and that kind of energy, because it's the death of something, the end of something, okay? So how are you going to invoke that energy to combat itself? It doesn't really make much sense. So the cleansing ritual that they did, where they were trying to end to basically break the link and end the link between this spirit and the client, this magician, it didn't really work. Now, they were not the only magical practitioners that he sought out. After that didn't work, he did eventually find other people which did something similar, not exactly the same, but similar. Again, that did not work either. Eventually, of course, he managed to get to us, Thoth, and we sat him down, spoke to him, spoke to Santa Muerte, and kind of essentially educated him on what a complete idiot he was to have done the things that he did. We didn't necessarily say it like that, because we do try to maintain a certain amount of professionalism, although that might not always come across in my videos. But we do. When you're a client, we are very professional. But essentially, we decided that it would be a good idea to hear both sides of the story. And of course, from Santa Muerte's perspective, he had agreed to be the offering. So she wasn't doing anything wrong, essentially. Whether you consider, you know, we could get into morality, but that's a whole subject in itself. She was just fulfilling her end of the bargain. She did what she was required to do for the practitioners, and she was enjoying and essentially eating her offering. So, you know, which the offering had agreed to. So essentially what we did was explain the situation to the client, the magician, and in exchange for an apology, of course, Santa Muerte was allowed, or was willing to release him of his obligations. That's all it took. Not this fighting fire with fire. It just took a little bit of intelligence to assess the situation and then sit the two parties down and kind of educate this magician. Now, from Santa Muerte's position and from the position of Death and that energy, it could have worked out a lot worse, because of course you are talking about Death. Now, she did not decide to kill him. All she decided to do was feed upon him a little bit. Now, for a mortal, for a human, that is a lot. He went through absolute hell with all of the problems, health-wise, emotional problems, financial problems. I mean, his old his entire life and every aspect of it was dying. Now, from his perspective, that was a big deal. From Ceremonial Muerte's perspective, not really a big deal. So it is one of those things that the takeaway from this essentially is do not agree to terms that you don't understand or sign contracts you don't understand, both in the mundane world and in the magical world. And also don't be an idiot. When you're looking for mentors, and bearing in mind we do mentor people, shout out to the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon team. But, you need to be a little bit careful. I'm not saying that you have to come to us. Obviously, we do offer the service, but it is one of those things that you need to be smart about such things. Not everyone out there wants to mentor you or teach or is obliged to. And those that do, not all of them have your best interests at heart. So that's something to really remember. It's quite an interesting story, and is one that I think illustrates the point, because it's something that, although I haven't seen lots of people make, I've heard many stories of a similar line where you have, normally it's younger people, go off on gap years and take part in these strange rituals abroad, and they don't really know what they're getting involved with. At the end of the day, magic is real, whether you believe it or not, and it can have an effect on you. This was a ceremonial magician, someone that should have known better, but clearly didn't. So anyway, if you're interested in hearing more of our cases, then head over to the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon and have a look at the link below. Thanks for listening.